Hi, Steve Harrison with Author Success, and I have another great interview of an author making a big difference in the world. Colonel Bob Sholly is with me. He's the author of Young Soldiers, Amazing Warriors. Bob, great to have you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate it.
You know, I love asking people who write quality books like yours. You've won many awards with this book. Why did you write it?
Well, there were several reasons. Number one was because the men that I served with in Vietnam on my first tour asked me to. They knew that I'd kept a journal, and they kept asking me at our reunions, when's the book going to come out? When's the book going to come out? And frankly, I had some notes and I had some writings, but I didn't have a book. But at the end of the day, I realized that, our numbers were thinning. And I figured if I was going to do something with it, I'd better get on with it. And so I started doing the research and started picking up interviews with guys who had been there. And so I really wrote it for my guys. In so doing, however, I've discovered that it helped me as kind of a therapeutic way of getting my feelings out on paper, as I'm sure it has other authors who've gone through traumatic experiences. And so that's the real reason of why the book was brought to print.
Yeah. And so that got you going. And then what have you found for people like me who grew up in the suburbs, never, I have not faced a bullet, I haven't been on the battlefield, and I'm grateful to men such as yourself who have really served our country in that way. What are you finding kind of is just the reaction of people, ordinary civilians maybe who've never even served in the military?
Well, it's interesting you should say something like that because for a number of years I've felt that, people have come around since the days of Vietnam. They have come around to thanking military folks for serving in uniforms, no matter what their service was. And while we really appreciate that sentiment, I've discovered that they really don't know what they're thanking us for. It's become somewhat PC to thank a military member for their service. And one of the things that I'm finding is as I get feedback from the book is that people are actually having read the book, they're beginning to realize what their soldiers do or have done when their nation sends them to war. And I'm getting a lot of that feedback from not only soldiers themselves, but from families or people who have known individuals who have been in combat who were in Vietnam.
Yeah, Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, you do such a great job of really giving the narrative and putting us there. I was actually at a meeting today, and I was just reading one of your accounts of this battle that you open up with, and you're kind of under the shrubs, and you're getting inundated with enemy fire, and the meeting had to start, and I didn't want to do the meeting. I was pulled into the book. I mean, you're so good at really putting us there. Give a sense of just. Give an example of just the kinds of stories you talk about, or maybe one example of that you find people are really enjoying in reading the book.
Well, some of the things that go on, you're not always getting shot at or shooting. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in between those moments of sheer terror. And some of that is, I'll give a good example. I was over there in 1966, 67, and we had captured this North Vietnamese. Actually, we'd captured 3 of them. And so we put them on their first helicopter ride to take them back to the rear for interrogation. And we blindfolded them, we tied their hands, but we didn't tie their feet so they could walk. Well, we got a resupply helicopter out that day, and so to send them back, we put them on the helicopter. Now, these helicopters have the doors always open, and there's no seats in them. It's always just sitting on the floor. And so the helicopter takes off, and it just begins to clear about 50 feet altitude and begins to gather speed here. When all of a sudden, we're looking at the helicopter, and one of these guys jumps out. He's decided he's had enough fun of this, and he hits the ground, and he bounces up. His hands are no longer tied. He rips the blindfold off and runs off into the jungle. We chase him, but he escapes. Well, the helicopter continues on, and they come back with a load of sea rations, but on the back of the pilot's seat, he's got a piece of cardboard written up. It says, 2 out of 3 VC prefer to fly with us.
Oh, I love it. So there's a lot of humor here. In fact, one thing Murphy's laws, that are kind of woven into the book, where you just have a real, like here, Murphy's law: no combat ready unit has ever passed inspection. No inspection ready unit has ever passed combat. So you have these great witticisms that I think talk about that. Is the humor a big part of what it takes to kind of get through something like that? How does humor play into just the whole experience and getting?
Well, that's you can't survive unless you have a sense of humor. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of guys that used to be kind of serious, but over time, they developed, and I have to admit that in some cases it was a black sort of humor. One of the things that I talk about is I send this young sergeant out to run an ambush. And so I go over the ambush, and I want a prisoner because we're not exactly sure what's going on with the enemy. And so I tell him, I want you to capture a Viet Cong or North Vietnamese soldier. And I point him out on the map where I want him to set this ambush up on this well-traveled trail. So he says, okay. And I said, no, by the way, do you speak Vietnamese? And he says, no. I said, well, here's what you do. And I didn't speak Vietnamese either, but I had a phrase book that had proven useful in the past. And so I said, here's what you say. Now, one of the common phrases that the GI picked up over there was Didi Mao, which means to run away real quick. Here comes the sergeant, let's Didi out of here. And so everybody knew Didi. That had just become embedded in the language. Well, Dung Lai means to stop. And so I said, okay, here's what you do. You say, Zung Lai, Zung Lai. And that means stop, and we got you covered, sort of thing. So he says, Zung Lai, Zung Lai. And so he's going off, and he goes out in the evening, and he sets up his ambush. And the next morning he reports back in. He says, sir, he says, it fell apart. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I was out there and I was practicing Zung Lai, and in the heat of the moment, this guy came bopping down the trail with his rifle on his shoulder, and I jumped out in front of him with my rifle and said, Didi! Because he had been so, anxious about it, he just went out with something that was more familiar to him than the new word. And he said, and he did. And we didn't catch him. So he had compromised his ambush site. He moved it and that kind of stuff, but nobody else came down the trail.
Wow.
So when he got back and he was reporting all this, and he thought I was going to really be angry, but I saw the humor in it, and I said, well, what would you do if you were to do different? He said, let somebody else handle the Vietnamese.
Well, one of the things I know you're doing a lot of speaking now, and I think you've had an extensive background, certainly as a colonel in the military. You've had a lot of business experience. I read, in your book that you were, at one point you said you were leading like 100 or 150 men to go against 500. What's it take to, when you face those kinds of odds? I mean, what's something about maybe leadership or planning, or just being a leader that most of us, say in business, who are we're leaders, but what are some of the kinds of things? Just give me an example of the kind of thing that you talk about when you speak that people like me who are leading in business, because I don't have your background, we typically wouldn't realize.
One of the main things is teamwork. Leadership is all about teamwork. If you don't have a team, you got nobody to lead. So one of the first things you got to learn is how to, number one, develop a team and how to make them work together. Now, as far as the 150 against 500 guys, I have to tell you that when you first go into combat, you don't really know how many guys are on the other side. In a battle in Europe, you probably would have a good feel if you were facing a national army of identifying, how much, what type of organization you're facing. But in the jungle, you have no idea whether you're really facing 2 guys or 2,000 because you can't find them, you can't count them. And so you just have to figure out, okay, based upon the confidence I have and the training that I've given people and the fact that we've worked together so well, that we're going to be able to overcome whatever it is that we run across. And that's the attitude that everybody has to have, is confidence, number one, in themselves. But number two, they've got to have confidence in their fellow guys, or ladies for that matter, in the business world, that they're going to do what they should be doing, and they're not going to let them down. There's not going to be backstabbing. You're not going to play politics. That, of course, is more dramatic in a combat situation than it would be in the business world. But still, the principles remain the same.
Yeah.
You have to be able to develop and have confidence in your organization that they're going to do the right things, and they're going to do the things that you've talked about and planned to reach whatever objective it is that you've identified.
Now, you've done both, so let me ask you, what's harder, to lead people in war or lead people in business?
To lead people in business. In the military, you learn leadership from day one. I never had a position in 35 years in the Army that I didn't have some sort of leadership training, whether it was learning how to follow or learning how to lead a group. And even if I was leading one guy, I still was the leader. And so in business, however, young folks come out of colleges or they come into the workforce. They have had absolutely little training unless they've been in the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or something like that that's got some sort of organization that deals with that. And so what they do is they find themselves in the workforce, and if they're smart, they've read some books, they've gone to some classes, but really it's kind of a catch as catch can and on the job training for some of these folks as far as leadership is concerned. Mm-hmm. Not until they get to be older and say middle management or something like that they've been promoted to because of the way they've been able to subconsciously develop teams or teamwork, and then evolve into a manager that they can really be sent to leadership courses and learn how to build those teams.
Yeah, well, it makes sense, that they don't have the training. I think that's why it's great that you're doing what you do with the speaking, with the training, and certainly there's so many lessons from your book, and I know you've won a number of awards. Talk about the success of the book. I know you don't like to brag, but you've won a number of awards for this.
Well, it's kind of surprising, frankly. We submitted the book into some competitions and to some book festivals with the hopes that we would, earn a couple of little awards that we could use in publicity and public relations campaigns. But we were just really surprised when we started winning so many awards, and to include a grand prize that they flew us out to California to Hollywood to accept. And then some of the more prestigious book festivals, they gave us the first prize for the best new book available in 2014, and they still continue to roll in. About 3 weeks ago, we received 2 more, which has brought the total to 20 awards. It's kind of surprising. It's also done very well in the Kindle on Amazon. Mm-hmm. We've been the #1 bestseller several times, and that's an hourly measurement. So you bounce in and out depending upon the measurements that Amazon does. But we've been there several times and continue to be the #1 bestseller in the categories.
Well, I think it's a great book for somebody who just wants a great read. They learn history. They learn, you really pull them into the story. So it's people like me who aren't familiar with war and battle in terms of just firsthand experience. You give that to us. Talk a little bit about what's the book. So, what are people finding who have been in the military? Whether they've been active duty or they haven't. Maybe they felt good about their service. Maybe they don't, or they've had a tough. What's been the range of kind of reactions from different types of military folks?
Well, it's actually gotten some very good reviews from former military and active duty military. As a matter of fact, a couple of active duty battalions have purchased several numbers of the book, multiple copies, to use in their advanced leadership courses for their junior officers and NCOs. General Gordon Sullivan, who wrote the foreword to the book, was very, very complimentary in saying that the book should be used in the basic and advanced infantry courses for all the young junior officers that are coming through Fort Benning and the other posts. It's frankly been very gratifying. Some of the families of the individuals who have been in Vietnam have been very complimentary as well, because when a soldier comes back from a war zone, he really doesn't want to talk about what he went through or what he experienced. And I find this to be true almost 95% of the time. I did the same thing. When I came back, my kids wanted to know what did you do in the war, Daddy? And I just did not want to talk about it. It brought too many strong memories and emotions back. And it's only been in the last few years that I've been able to discuss, even 40, 50 years ago, what I went through. So a lot of the families have been very, very interested in reading what their soldiers, or what at least some of their soldiers went through. And some of the guys who are mentioned in the book and who were in the unit, their families have read it and said, we never knew. And this has given us a platform and a basic basis upon which to have decent conversations. And we're now having conversations about what happened years and years ago, and they're now beginning to get some of that familial support. Some of the guys have read the book and said, I thought I was okay, but reading the book, I realized that it brought up some emotions and memories that I realized that I really hadn't put to bed. And so therefore, I'm going to go get counseling. A couple of guys have even said, I'm in counseling at the VA, and this tells the story and articulates, the experiences, even though it wasn't the exact experience, enough to where I bought the book to give to my VA counselor, so he could understand more of what we went through, and so he could treat me better.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations on all the success that you're having. The book is a great read, whether you've had military experience or not. You want to learn lessons of leadership, or just really be pulled into a wonderful story. It's Young Soldiers, Amazing Warriors. It's available on Amazon and Kindle, but also at youngsoldiersamazingwarriors.com. Bob, thanks for joining me today.
Steve, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.